Okay, good morning. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar with Groundsure, which will look at mining in the cities, and in particular, we'll be looking at Liverpool during today's webinar. My name is Haifa Khatib, and I am a marketing assistant here at InfoTrack. I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Harvey-James, a mining consultant at Groundsure, and Andy Crawshaw, senior account manager at Groundsure, who will be taking you through today's session. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to draw your attention to the Q&A tab, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We will be running a Q&A at the end of this session, so please type any questions you might have for Tom or Andy along with your name into the Q&A box. That way, if we run out of time or your question requires further clarification, we can extract your information and follow up with you directly after the webinar. So now I'm going to hand you over to Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. As I've said, my name's Tom. I'm one of the mining consultants here at Groundsure. So today we're going to go through a little bit about mining in Liverpool. We're going to cover off a few things, starting with the processes of mining itself, looking at a few styles of mineral extraction. We'll then look at the actual unique geology of Liverpool, and as to that, the sort of things you'd expect to kind of see mined and extracted in the city. We've got a little bit then, of course, about the actual mining risk in Liverpool, what those sort of numbers look like and how many properties can potentially be affected. And then we're going to go on to some really exciting a case study for this area, which will be looking at the Williamson tunnels. So yeah, this is quite a unique an opportunity to delve into quite a strange and quirky little subterranean feature in the city. So that should be quite good. We'll cover off some of the data that goes into the reports and how the consultants use that data when assessing mining risk. And then I'll pass back to Andy and he'll go through some of the Groundsure reports as well. So if we start with actually what is mining. So something that I'm sure many of you, most of you will know, it's something that people are aware of. It's just the extraction of minerals or geological deposits from the earth. It's something that no matter where you go in the country or the world really, people are aware of it in one way or another. They've had relatives, friends, family that have been involved in that historically. But what's quite crucial is to be able to get an idea of just how vast the mining industry really is, and the sheer scale needed within the mining industry to help with everyday modern amenities and every modern day life, especially as we start moving towards trying to live a slightly greener existence. Perhaps we're using more minerals and more rarer and harder to source minerals to be able to do things such as things like electric vehicles and solar panels and things where are needing more minerals from the earth, and they all ultimately have to be mined from somewhere. So during a wonderful seminar, I've spoken to a few people about this before, and I've said it to many people before, but a geologist said to me that everything you see around you is being grown or mined. And if you just take a look around now, you've got presumably your laptops or computers in front of you, which you're dialing in for this from, may have a coffee mug on the side there, which the materials to create that have been quarried or mined to some extent. Your phone, perhaps. We've got the breakdown of just some of the more common metals and elements that are within the common everyday iPhone. Of course, this list is not exhaustive. It would be considerably longer, but these are a few of the ones which you may have come across or you may have be familiar with, things like aluminium, gold, tin, iron, copper, things like that. Lithium as well, getting a lot of hype at the minute with the kind of resurgence in the down in the southwest at least. And then of course there are rarer earth metals as well, so things like europium and things which make up a small percentage of the earth's crust and actually are incredibly hard and to mine and hard to even find and locate in the first place. So another way of looking into just how vast the demand for mining really is if we take a look at a time when mining in the UK was at its peak. So we're looking at the area at the time around the Industrial Revolution. And we can see here that the demand for coal and for metals as well was really at the highest. It's probably the highest that it is kind of been historically in this country. We've got a real demand for that then. So if you look at the demands for mining by the mining industry itself, it starts to kind of set the balls rolling. You can really see just how much it really was needed. So of course, there's a demand here for coal to power the foundries that produce steel. Now that is still the same today, apart from the fact that we import our coal from elsewhere rather than mine it ourselves. But that is still very much still the process. Steel is required to make things like tools in order to actually mine the coal in the first place. And similarly for the headgear that is used to raise or to surface. So that's a sort of built metal, almost like laddered structures, which you sometimes see in mining areas situated above shafts. They usually have a series of like large wheels on the top of them and some winding cables. So those are the head frames, and of course they're made out of metal as well. Coal, historically, at this time at least, was needed to power pumping engines to dewater the mine, or the man engines to actually get the miners into the mine in the first place. You've also got coal being needed for the steam locomotives. So at this time, getting stuff hauled in and out of the mine was a mixture of just brute force and manpower from the miners themselves, using things such as pit ponies, so using horses and small donkeys to be able to pull things out of the mine. And of course, in some of the larger mines where there was money, some steam locomotives and rails and trains and tracks as well. And of course, at this time, they were all steam, so they needed the coal to power those. And utilizing these sorts of innovations for the time allowed miners to go deeper in terms of being able to access more ore bodies and more coal reserves and extract that in both coal and in metal mines as well. So we have bricks. These were needed to build things such as the mine buildings, the foundries themselves, also the houses for the miners. These things may have been quarried in terms of down here in the southwest where I am. Lots of buildings were made out of the natural granite. So this would have just been quarried as it was, as the stone already sat, whereas sometimes the bricks were needed to be created, in which case things like clays and shales, limestones, these are all quarried and sometimes mined, especially with chalk, in things called brick fields, and these were then put together and amalgamated into bricks. Crucibles, so crucibles are needed to ultimately to smelt the steel. So it links back to almost to the beginning there, where they would go and they would need to melt this steel, but they'd need something hard and tough enough to withstand the intense heat of the furnaces. So this is when fire clay comes in. So fire clay is often embedded between coal seams and was extracted at the same time as coal. And this was able to withstand intense heats and pressures and fluctuations in temperatures, more importantly, I suppose, from the furnaces. So you can see then how this cycle, it kind of loops back around, and it's just kind of a constant demand. And this is before you even start considering all the variables and needs and demands for mining outside of the industry itself. So I hope that paints a picture about just how vast this legacy is throughout the UK. So when we look at types of mining, I always say that we could run an entire series of webinars just entirely on mining styles themselves. But if we look at a few that are kind of important and relevant to this area, we've got things like surface working and quarry working. So lots of Liverpool, as we'll see later, is underlain by sandstone beds that were laid down millions of years ago. And these can be exploited sometimes when they outcrop near surface, or the deposits are more shallower. They may be quarried along with other things like clays and sands and gravels and such. These things would also be quarried at surface, and these can range from small quarries, say 5 meters across sort of size, which may be That's typically on the smaller side, which may be related to a farm, and a farmer may be needing some stone to repair a wall or repair a building. So a small quarry is put in, right up to large scale commercial quarries, which were there for the sole purpose of making money from that exploited stone, considerably larger. We also have the examples of underground bed workings. So things like pillar and stool minings, where they would go through and they would strip out the mineral that they were looking for, leaving in support structures, those pillars to support the rooftops there. So highlighting the geology of Liverpool itself. So this is quite an interesting one, especially the image on the right there, to show the extent of some of the quarrying in proximity to the residential housing. So you can see there the extent of the quarry, that sort of dashed wiggly lines at the edges there, depicting the quarry face. So this is where it's actually cut down. And what we've got there is you've got a road on the left-hand side of the image going from that main street, a little access route into the quarry where material will be taken in and out. But as you can see, the face of that quarry, which at the time of that extraction would be kind of a sheer drop, goes right up and abuts some of those residential houses. It's quite extraordinary, just to the extent that they would go to, and really the consideration that was given to local homeowners and those houses, the structural stability at the time. But it's important to consider why that quarry was even there in the first place. And so for that, really, look into what underlies some of the city. And so the solid geology, that is something that was consisted of a mixture of sort of sandstones, and in some cases some of the mudstones as well. And these date back 251 to 201 roughly million years ago in what's known as the Triassic period. So this is when these sandstones were laid down. And so the geology around the local area is a mixture of a variety of different things, but consists of some faulted coal measures. So these are then overlain by these younger Triassic sandstones and mudstones, which is what we're getting exploited here in the quarry there, and also the sort of things that potentially were worked in the case study, which we'll look at later. I say potentially, and that will become clear why I say potentially when we look at the case study. To say lots of these quarries are seen recorded throughout the city, and these have exploited these sandstones. And in some cases, they do vary in size, and we've got large ones here, smaller ones. Some have been developed over. This one, for instance, has been developed into a green space, which is not uncommon. Often the quarries can be either made, if they're quite large and take up quite a large footprint, of course the remediation to be able to, and the cost to be able to put things right, to be able to actually develop housing on top of them, sometimes outweighs the good it would do. So they get turned into recreational grounds, parks, things like that, and occasionally nature reserves and such. So in this case, that certainly has been the case. But in others, they've been built over, developed with a mixture of residential and commercial enterprises. And we just beg the question of making sure that we evaluate these risks properly, really. I suppose another point that is quite nice to and important to consider is that whilst this area hasn't been developed historically in terms of housing on top of it, lots of these areas that were previously perhaps turned down for development due to their mining heritage or their quarrying, due to the problems, are now being looked at by developers because there is this need to build more houses and need to develop certain areas. So these areas that have previously people have walked away from are now sometimes, and in some cases, being considered for planning. Which means that we definitely need to be aware of what is beneath the surface when assessing these risks and making these projects to see if they are actually viable. So mining risk in Liverpool. So some of you may have seen, you may have read it. I've mentioned on a few occasions now that the white paper that Groundsure released, titled Hidden Hazards, Understanding Non-Coal mining property risks is a fantastic way to really explain the real sort of risk and hazards that can affect property in the UK from historic mining activity. Certainly, if we look in the case of Liverpool here, we can see that nearly 58,000 properties in Liverpool could be affected by non-coal mining. So we've got 57,683 there coming back from the data query. And if you look at quarries as well, so we've mentioned these, of course, previously, we're currently standing at just shy of 200 recorded quarries within Liverpool. And then if you look at the pits as well, so that's nearly 500. So occasionally on historical sources, they will say quarry or former quarry, disused quarry, and in brackets, sometimes it will tell you the stone or what they are actually working there. In other cases, that's not always the case. Sometimes we get pits or old pit. Sometimes in other cases, you just have the styling on the historical mapping, which corresponds to a quarry or a pit, but doesn't definitively actually tell you with an annotation what it is, which is when a certain level of interpretation from our mining consultancy team is needed, just to kind of have a look at that and judge whether that is actually showing, say, a pit or a quarry, or whether it's showing sort of like a cut feature or a landscaping feature. It's really important that we can go through and differentiate between the two. And having done that for this area, this is where these statistics are coming from. Of course, then we've also got the mine shafts recorded within the city as well, which currently stand at 281. So if we take a look at what has been mined in Liverpool historically, I've highlighted a few of the key commodities that were worked here. We're going to focus predominantly on more so on the sandstone today, because it's relevant for the case study, and we'll see that in a moment. But of course, other things have been worked here as well. Try to put on the ones that are most commonly understood and most commonly kind of people are aware of. These ones. These are all things which you do see commonly across lots of varying different cities across the UK. Things like sand and gravel and clays. These were worked historically all over. Of course, more regionally affected things like coal and of course sandstone as well, depending on how it was deposited and when. But yeah, for this one and for this case study, which we're going to come on to next, predominantly the sandstone is the main event. So now we move on to the case study of the Williamson tunnels. Now, I trained at university as an archaeologist, so of course, moving into mining was a different kind of avenue for me. It was certainly something that was covered, but the fact that I'm able to now combine in this case study of the Williamson tunnels my excitement and love for mining, and for also just human activity and the strange and wonderful things that humans get up to makes this case study quite exciting. So we've got an image there of part of one of the tunnels, and so we'll go on to explain. We've got a few different slides which we'll go through to explain actually who built them, what they were for, maybe what they were for, and how they can potentially affect the property. So these tunnels were built by what is recorded as, in many historical sources, as quite an eccentric man. Historical sources terms, not necessarily my own. He was called Joseph Williamson. He came from quite a poor background in Liverpool. His family didn't have much when they were growing up. He went and joined a local tobacco merchant to try and make some money, and was eventually able to start buying property. So what he did was he developed a network of tunnels which ran under a specific part of the city in Liverpool. So their true purpose is widely disputed and remains a mystery to this day. Multiple people have their own opinions about what happened, and the evidence has probably, sadly, died with Joseph Williamson. So really knowing exactly why these were built, I'm not sure really we will ever know, but we can start to piece together a little bit of an idea what about it might be based on the available evidence that we have. So these are high vaulted features. They sit above cuts into this native sandstone beds below that we mentioned. But why did he build them, and what really were they for? And do they have any potential impact on the stability of the housing sat above them? All good questions and things that we'll cover in the next couple of slides. So Joseph Williamson was born in 1769. And as I said, he was raised by quite a poor family and eventually found work in Liverpool for a local tobacco merchant called Thomas Tate. And he managed to make a name for himself. He did very well, ended up running the business, and eventually it enabled him to retire at quite a good age for the time, and left him with enough wealth to begin buying up something of a property portfolio, really, focusing primarily around the district of Edge Hill in the city. So Joseph lived on Mason Street, which, according to our own geological data in-house, the geological mapping, some of the borehole data, like many properties in this area, it sits above these Triassic sandstones, which was used locally for building and construction materials. So being able to really carve and shape this material made it perfect for the job. It's also a really strong stone, so it was perfect for these purposes. And it was from this address in Mason Street that Williamson set about expanding his portfolio, but not above ground, more so underground. So what these features consisted of are a large subsurface network of tunnels and caverns excavated beneath this area of Edge Hill in Liverpool. They're dug into the sandstone, and some of these spaces boast these staggeringly high vaulted ceilings. If you look at the section called the banqueting hall, at least this section is estimated to be about 64 foot long and nearly 30 foot high. And what Williamson did was, to get this done, he employed hundreds of local people to dig these tunnels. He took on a lot of the sort of planning and design work himself, despite not, from my own research at least, having much of a sort of what we would understand now as a mining or geotechnical background. But nevertheless, the planning and design was largely him. And he employed these local people, the majority of which at the beginning of this venture of his at least were what they would consider at the time unskilled laborers. They hadn't trained. They were people that he was able to get involved to do the heavy work, to do the lifting there. And the purpose of why he did this is very unclear. And as I said before, really the chance to find out the real reason that these tunnels were constructed probably died with Joseph Williamson. It's a topic that is ripe for speculation and controversy, excuse me. And with some of those suggesting it was just an extension of the local quarrying. So this certainly is one possibility. There is quarrying in this area. We know there's sandstone in this area. So were there perhaps existing underground quarries which he expanded, or perhaps there was a quarrying venture tied into this as well, and it was a way of sustaining this perhaps. If he was extracting the sandstone, perhaps he was able to make some money to continue plugging this venture. We're not entirely sure. Others suggest smuggling, but without any real concrete evidence, it's really difficult to say whether any of these suggestions really hold any weight. One highly regarded theory is that the tunnels were the means by which Williamson gave support and employment to the local poorer community, something that he'd be able to relate to from his earlier life perhaps, and it offered them a chance to make a living and to make a little bit of money. And this gave him the excuse to be able to do that. So now looking at how these properties that are above and near these workings are potentially affected. So for those properties underlain by the recorded extent of the Williamson tunnels, or at least considered to lie within the zone of influence, so sometimes referred to as the ZOI, this is the area of ground at the surface that may be affected by subsidence should it occur. There is, of course, an element of risk. And when it comes to assessing that risk, the tunnels are considered as to their potential instability and the likelihood of such instability causing a potential subsidence event, both within the tunnels themselves and also that at surface. And the fact that there is little evidence of the quality of construction adds to the risk factor, as antiquated subterranean features, mining or otherwise, are often poorly documented, and from our own experience, available sources do not always paint the clearest picture, or at least not to their fullest extent. This means when our mining consultants evaluate the potential risk to a property in this area, we have a little bit more to consider than normal when trying to reach a conclusion. Many properties in Edge Hill lie within an area of historic activity for the extraction of sandstone. And in some cases, this is due to the tunnels. When properties are directly underlain or considered to lie within the potential zone of influence of the tunnels, we're able to assess the risk and advise on the level of risk that these excavations pose. In the majority of instances, a detailed survey or such like a visual inspection from a qualified surveyor looking for visible defects and signs of settlement may be recommended. And this would help better assess any potential ground movement posed by the tunnels. So now I've set the scene a little and covered off the tunnels, I thought I'd cover off a little bit about some of the other sources that I use in my day-to-day role here at Groundsure. This will be the same for the other mining consultants as well. So starting with the mining records, touching a bit on the Ordnance Survey mapping, and finishing with a few additional sources. So the mining records. Prior to the 19th century, mining wasn't massively largely recorded. It wasn't until the 1840s that the Mining Record Office, as we know it of it today, was established in London. And it wasn't until the 1870s that an act was passed in Parliament that made it a legal requirement to deposit an abandonment plan within 3 months of your date of leaving your mine. Prior to that, it's quite scary, in as much that you could go and open your mine and do what you liked in your mine and then go about your day, and you didn't have to formally record what you did or tell anybody where you did it, which makes things somewhat difficult when trying to assess historical mining risk. Prior to 1870, in the 1850s, there was a requirement to produce a plan, but no requirement to deposit it anywhere. So many of these weren't done, or they were kept in private collections or shoved in people's attics, sheds, got damaged or destroyed. The point being, they never ended up, I should say never, they largely didn't end up, some of them did, in the repository's hands where they would be looked after and where they would be used to their fullest purpose. And it's also important at this point to point out that these abandonment plans, they weren't put together to help with conveyancing searches in 2022. They were very much to help ensure the safety of the miners. It is a sad fact that there have been countless mining disasters over the years throughout the country, impacted with great loss of life, all of which likely could have been, some of which could have been prevented or avoided if proper and accurate plans had been available and followed, referenced at the time. So in 1883, the Mining Record Office was transferred to the Home Office, no doubt with a collection of plans. And it was between 1920 and 1931, there were 2 quite severe mining accidents, following which there was a call nationwide for plans to be deposited. All those that were held in private collections were asked to be sent forward. And this got a really great response, especially if we consider that quite a lot of the people that probably had them in private collections were those that had a tie to mining, had a bit of a connection, and so would want to have done the right thing and help out for this cause. In 1839, the plans were transferred from Buxton to London, from London, apologies. And after the Second World War in the 1950s, the coal plans, these were segregated from plans of all other minerals. So whether you had a plan showing tin workings or whether they were fire clay and limestone workings or ironstone, those would be separated out from the coal. The coal went one way and all the others went the other. And these were split into regional areas to allow the plans to be more accessible. This is why if you go to your local library or record office today, whatever one is closest to you, you can pull out the original mine plans for the area that you are in, and it makes them a lot more accessible for everybody. And I'd encourage you to do that. There are some fantastic plans around which are really interesting if this sort of thing excites you. So the plans eventually were all reunited in 1992. This was at what was then known as British Coal, now the Coal Authority, and these were then inherited by the Coal Authority on privatisation of the coal industry in 1992. And this is when they were all finally moved to the headquarters of the Coal Authority in Mansfield, which is where lots of them remain today. And the important thing about why that is all important, and that last slide is important, is because these plans were sometimes never produced, or they weren't deposited properly. They were lost in transit often. A case most recently for myself, when dealing with a particular mine, I tried to find the plan at the local record office, and they informed me the Coal Authority had them. But that you have to go around and try and find where they necessarily are, because they do get transferred. And by going to these record offices and going to various authorities, they can help point you in the direction of where these plans reside today, because they have had a long journey. But ultimately, most of the plans were transferred, as I said, to the Coal Authority headquarters. But some of these, if they weren't lost in transit and they are still in the respectable depositories, some of them have become unreadable, torn, they've been written on, tea stains on them, and the archivists hate it when that happens. There's some that I've come across and colleagues have come across with blood stains on them. So it tells us that the records we consider are incomplete. And the reason why these plans are produced is not necessarily always clear on the plans that were deposited. Sometimes they can show exaggerated reserves drawn to raise interest in selling shares within the mine. That is really common. Some plans only show a fraction of the mine's extent, identifying only areas where the mine was looking to exploit, not areas that they potentially have already exploited. This might mean they can get out of paying certain taxes if the mine is smaller. You only had to pay certain taxes and produce a plan if you had a mine worked by only over 12 people. So there are ways and loopholes that miners and mine captains could get around having to do these plans, or having to do these plans properly. And that's why we really need to give careful consideration when analysing these historic sources. So if we look at Groundshore's mining consultants, so that is me and some of our other team. We've got a great team of consultants here, and I originally was one of the mining consultants at what was then Mining Searches UK. Groundshore acquired Mining Searches UK in January 2020, along with their team of, at that time, 7 mining search specialists and 3 geologists. We have now grown, which is extremely exciting, and we've been interpreting and investigating mining since 1978. If we look on the right-hand side there, that is a plan of an ironstone mine called Liverpool. So this is the sort of historical plans that we get to look at on a daily basis. So you can see here some of the shafts are named with the small circles. We've got the hatching showing the actual mine buildings there as well. The sort of orange lines are showing drifts or adit tunnels. And then we've got these blue crisscrosses, which are look a bit like city streets in like a busy urbanized environment. These are the tunnels that are exploiting the mineral, and the squares within them are the pillars which are left in to support the mine roof. So using some of these plans is fantastic. We have to use these in addition with the rest of our extensive historical mining database. The use of our former site investigations is paramount to being able to actually understand how the ground works and what is actually beneath the ground, and the kind of makeup and structure of historical mining features. And this has allowed us really to build these innovative solutions for clients, including things like 3D modeling for development sites and bespoke securing platforms. As well as things like this, we're also holding over 6,000 geological plans, which really help evaluate what is going on geologically beneath the ground, and the sort of things that you may expect to find given the localized geology of any given area. So now looking at the National Mining and Stability Risk Model. So the National Mining and Stability Risk Model is a tool that Groundshore has developed and used for many years within its mining and stability reports. The model has been developed and redefined over 40 years of reporting and investigating mining related risk. And this model now includes even more proprietary and third-party data to ensure a comprehensive assessment is provided for each individual property. Each mining feature and data point has been expertly risk ranked, and this combined with our own expert knowledge, investigation reports, and additional information from thousands of transactions allows us to accurately assess the mining risk and stability risk posed to each individual property. So when each report is ordered, it may be off the back of one of our intelligent alerts. It goes through the National Mining Stability Risk Model to determine any risks to that property. Where risks are identified, a specialist mining consultant will review all the data available for the property and surrounding area to determine if there is a risk. And in many instances, we will be able to issue a pass report, and that is the best solution possible. That's what we want to be able to do. And while some may not see the importance of a mining search, if it has passed, you'll have the peace of mind that the report has been fully interpreted, which is where the value lies, and knowing that your client's property is not affected. So I hope that was useful for you, and if not useful, then beneficial in its exciting way. I hope you found it it was interesting for you to learn a little bit more about the mining risk in Liverpool, specifically surrounding the Williamson tunnels. I'm going to hand you back to Andy now, who's going to go through a few of the reports options available. And thank you again for taking the time to tune in.
Thanks very much, Tom. Much appreciated. That was great. Yeah, just to let you know about a couple of reports that we've got that might be able to help you in showing your clients exactly what's there or what has been there previously. The first one, the sample on the left, is our GeoRisk report. So this is the definitive report that we have that shows every sort of non-coal mining that's gone on in the UK. So if you think like things like China clay, if you think about tin down in Cornwall, limestone and things like that, it will pick everything up for you. But it also looks at recorded ground movement and ground stability issues as well as looking at natural ground stability hazards that might be in the area too. We then have our GeoRisk Plus report, which is everything that is included within the GeoRisk report, but it also includes a full Con 29M. So with that will also come a mine entry interpretive report, and also a claims history report with it as well. And if it's in a Cheshire Brine area, it will include a full Cheshire Brine report as requested by the Cheshire Brine Compensation District in there too. And if you just move to the next one, Tom. Right, and if you already order environmental reports, which I know the majority of you guys do, then we have our Avista report. So the Avista is a full residential environmental report that covers contaminated land, a full flood risk assessment. It looks at a radon check. It also has planning applications and planning constraints, but it also includes everything that the GeoRisk Plus does. So every type of mining, but also that Con 29M, that Cheshire Brine report, and it also looks at all sorts of transportation as well. So it looks at underground tunnels, including the Williamson tunnels that Tom's been through. But it looks at the underground in London, the Merseyrail, the underground rail up in Glasgow and also in Newcastle. And it'll also look at things like HS2 and Crossrail as well if you're down in London. So it is, as I said, the full environmental report for residential transactions, which saves you a bit of time and a bit of money in getting all the separate reports that might flag up as risk alerts for whichever search provider you guys use. Thanks, Tom.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. I'll just hand back now. Do we have? Thank you very much for everybody tuning in. I just wonder if we had any questions come in at all.
Yes, so thank you, Tom and Andy. I can see we've had some questions come through, so we'll get straight into the Q&A. Is there any way to know if pillars have been robbed from a mine?
Yeah, so occasionally when we are looking specifically at like kind of pillar and stall workings, it was quite common for pillars to be removed in kind of like a last ditch attempt to raise some funds. Occasionally they are recorded, but usually after the fact. The miners weren't really going to admit that they had done something which they probably shouldn't have been doing. So it's usually if a surveyor has been into the mine since closure and has recorded them, or if there's been some sort of settlement or collapse at surface, once it's been investigated, they sometimes can be found out, but not usually from the historical sources, no.
Okay, thank you. Are any of the Williamson tunnels still open?
Yes, they are. So some of them are still accessible to the public. So they do occasionally do like guided tours for research groups and then schools and universities and such. So they haven't been kind of filled in. There are sections which I believe are inaccessible, but yeah, largely some of them are still accessible. There are still ways to get into them with helps of people. I think there's a conservation charity which looks after them now. So yeah, they are still open, they are still accessible, people are still able to get in and out of them.
Okay, and we have one last question. Are pillar and stall workings used anywhere else in the country?
Yeah, so they get all over the country really, typically working, so bed working. So when we've got things in Cornwall, such as kind of steeply dipping hard rock veins, which is how our kind of tin and copper ore is deposited, that style of working is not really appropriate for that type of geology, but certainly more up north, we've got bed workings and bed formations, then yeah, those are quite common.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's all. Oh, I think we might have one more question. Okay, this question says, would this information on mining not be revealed in Groundsure home screen search?
Well, I can take that one. So what we'll do in the home screen search is we will give some information on ground stability. It will flag if there has been historic mining in the area. But actually, to get the detail of what type of mining and what extent of mining is there, then we'd recommend getting the full geo-risk report, just for that extra bit of detail in it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering that one. I think that's all the questions now. I would like to say a big thank you to Groundsure and Tom and Andy in particular for their time today, and hope you all found this session informative. If you have any other questions about anything you've learned today, or questions in relation to ordering Groundsure reports through the InfoTrack platform, you can either contact us using the details on your screen or reach out to your account manager, who will be able to assist you. This session is being recorded and we will send you a copy so you can refer back to the notes. So all that's left to say is thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your day.